Alright guys, a couple of years ago, a teacher shared with me a PowerPoint that she had found on plagiarism, and I really like it, so I'm going to share it with you guys. Please note, I did not make this PowerPoint, but it's really one of the best ones that I have seen on describing what plagiarism is and how you can not do it. So, to start with, plagiarism is the act of presenting the words, ideas, images, sounds, or the creative expression of others as your own. Basically, when you are taking what somebody else has said or maybe an idea they've had, you are plagiarizing it. If you have included the words and ideas of others in your work that you neglected to cite, or you have had any kind of help you wouldn't want your teacher to know about, you've probably plagiarized. There are two major types of plagiarism. There's intentional and unintentional. Intentional would be things like copying a friend's work, buying or borrowing papers. They do have websites out there that will allow you to buy certain papers to turn in, or you might borrow, let's say if somebody had the class before you, and you might borrow their paper to turn in. Cutting and pasting blocks of text from electronic sources without documenting. So if you go to a website and you see something you really like and you just copy and paste it into your paper. Media borrowing without documentation. So if you use a song or a picture or something that comes from somebody else, you don't give them credit for it. And then web publishing without permissions of the creators. So if somebody puts something out there and you use it, but you don't give them credit for it, it can be intentional plagiarism. Unintentional plagiarism is going to be careless paraphrasing. So you're trying to give credit where credit is due, but you don't do it well enough. Poor documentation, so you're trying to cite, but you're not citing correctly. Quoting excessively, if over half the paper is a quote from someone else or is a fact or statistic from another source, then there's too many other voices in there, not enough of your own voice, so that's unintentional plagiarism. And then failure to use your own voice. So your voice is how you come across in your writing, and even though you're not professionally published or things like that, it still has your own voice when you write. So when you start using stuff from other people, your voice disappears in the midst of that. So you want to make sure you're using your own words, that you're using your own thoughts and feelings and things like that. Now, you do not need to document when you're discussing your own experiences, observations, or reactions. So when you're just talking about how you feel or things that have happened to you, things that you've seen, you don't need to cite that because that's from your personal life. It's not something that you got from another source. If you're compiling the results of original research or from science experiments, for example, if you performed an experiment in your science class and your English teacher asked you to write a report about it, when you are giving that teacher the information from that lab and you are stating your statistics and things like that, that's your own research. You do not need to cite where that came from. Or if you're using common knowledge, you don't need to document it. Now, examples of common knowledge is John Adams was our second president, or the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Basically, if you see a fact in 3 or more sources and you're fairly certain your readers already know this information, it is likely to be common knowledge. But when you're in doubt, if you don't know if it counts as common knowledge or not, go ahead and cite. So what's the big deal? If I change a few words, I'm okay, right? Wrong. Paraphrasing original ideas without documenting your source is plagiarism too. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you come up with an idea for a really hip TV show, something you think everybody's going to love watching. And so you tell your friend, hey, I have this idea for a show, here's what would happen. Your friend goes, wow, that's amazing, I'm going to share that with a producer that I know personally. So your friend goes to the producer and says, hey, look, I have an idea for a TV show, what do you think? The producer says, wow, that's a great idea. Here's a check for $1 million for such a great idea. Now your friend has $1 million, you don't. Are you going to be happy? Probably not, because it was your idea and they got credit for it. So you need to make sure that even if you're using ideas, if you're using somebody's thoughts or quotes or whatnot, you have to use it as it is written, or you have to paraphrase it well, or else it doesn't count. Even if you change a couple of words, even if you change one or two or half the sentence, what have you, it's still plagiarism if you're not correctly paraphrasing and you're not correctly citing. You can borrow from the works of others in your own work. Again, you need to cite this information. So if somebody has written something about the topic that you're writing about and you really like what they've had to say about it, you can put that information in your paper as long as you give them credit for having said it first. You need to use these 3 strategies: quoting, paraphrasing, summarizing. You need to blend this material in with your own to make sure that your own voice is heard. So basically, you want to include this stuff to help support your ideas, but you don't want it to overwhelm your ideas. You want your voice to still come through. Quoting. Quotations are the exact words of an author, copied directly from a source, word for word. Quotations must be cited. So, you're going to use quotations when you want to add the power of an author's words to support your argument. If somebody said something really well, you want to make sure that you use that too because you like the way they said it. You need to copy that quote word for word and give that author credit. If you want to disagree with an author's argument, if somebody has said something that you don't agree with and you want to make a point of putting it in your paper and showing why and how you disagree with it, again, you want to quote, copy word for word. If you want to highlight particularly eloquent or powerful phrases or passages, if you just like the way someone said something, use it word for word, give credit to the author. If you are comparing and contrasting specific points of views, so if you maybe are writing about how 2 authors discuss a certain topic, then you can quote directly from the source. Or if you want to note the important research that precedes your own, so if someone has done something in the past that goes in line with what you're writing about, and you want to talk about what they found, you can do that. But again, you want to quote word for word and give credit to the author. Next, you have paraphrasing. Paraphrasing means rephrasing the words of an author, putting his or her thoughts in your own words. When you paraphrase, you rework the source's ideas, words, phrases, and sentence structures with your own. Like quotations, paraphrased material must be followed with in-text documentation and cited on your work's cited page. You paraphrase when you plan to use information on your note cards and wish to avoid plagiarizing. You want to avoid overusing quotations. You want to use your own voice to present information. Now, a lot of people mess up paraphrasing because they copy down what the author says word for word, and then they simply pull out a thesaurus and change the words to synonyms so that the sentence kind of still reads the same. You've only changed a couple of words. True paraphrasing is you take what the author says, you put it in your own words. So the best way to do this that I have found is to read an excerpt from the author or read a selection by the author and then turn it upside down, wait for a moment, and jot down the things that stuck out to you that were really important. A lot of times when you're jotting down those notes, you're putting them in your own words because because the source material is no longer right in front of you. Even though you're putting it in your own words, you still need to give the author credit because, again, they're not your original ideas. The ideas came from someone else. You're simply paraphrasing what the author said. Next is summarizing. Summarizing is very similar to paraphrasing, except for summarizing is going to encompass a larger area of text. It involves putting the main ideas of one or several writers into your own words, including only the main points. Summaries are significantly shorter than the original and take a broad overview of the source material. Again, it is necessary to attribute summarized ideas to their original sources. So you want to summarize when you want to establish background or offer an overview of a topic. You want to describe knowledge from several sources about a topic. You want to determine the main ideas of a single source. Again, summarizing is similar to paraphrasing, except for it's going to encompass a larger source, maybe an entire novel or chapter, things like that, and you are only discussing the main points. You're not getting into the specifics. And like paraphrasing and quoting, you're still citing the original source material. Now, as you take notes or you're writing stuff in your outline, you want to include any direct quotes or unique phrases in quotation marks or mark with a big Q, and make sure the speaker or writer's name is identified. So if you use a quote from somebody, make sure you put their name off to the side, make sure you put it in quotation marks so you know, hey, this came from someone else. If you have anything that you have paraphrased, you want to make sure that you note that paraphrase with the writer's name and mark it with a P. So if you've read a piece and you really like what it says and you kind of want to summarize it or paraphrase it into something shorter, you can do that in your outline, but make sure you make a note of it with the author's name so you can be sure to include that citation. You want to include any page numbers and source references so you can go back and check for accuracy as you write. So if you are getting something from a printed source like a magazine or a newspaper or a novel or some other book, make sure that you're jotting down any kind of page numbers. If you're going to websites, make sure you're typing or writing down the web address. That way you can always go back and make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do and you're doing it correctly. Now, you need to use in-text documentation when you use an original idea from one of your sources, whether you quote it or paraphrase it. You summarize original ideas from one of your sources. You use factual information that is not common knowledge, and again, if you don't know, you need to cite it just to be safe. You quote directly from a source, or you use a date or fact that might be disputed. So if someone says in reading your paper, I don't necessarily think that's true, you want to cite where it came from, so you are kind of covering yourself and saying, hey, look, this is where I found it, this is why I used it. So how do you cite using MLA style? Parenthetical citations are usually placed at the end of a sentence before the period, but they may be placed in the middle of a sentence. It's more common to have them in the middle of the sentence if you are changing sources through the sentence, but most of the time you want it to come at the end of the sentence before the period. You want to cite the author's last name and the page number it comes from. If there is no author, then you cite the title and the page number. If you are using more than one book by the same author, you want to list the last name of the author, comma, write the title, and then the page number. If you identify the author and title in the text, so within your sentence you say, according to Albert Einstein in his paper, Relativity, whatever, blah, 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 then at the end, all you have to put in the parentheses is the page number. If you're using a web address, when you are citing a web source in text, you are not likely to have page numbers. So you would just include the first part of the entry, whatever you were supposed to include for the book. So if you have an author's last name, you use their last name. If you do not have an author's name, you need to use the title of the website or the title of the web page that you're on if you're on a specific page on a website. Make sure that you are not using the web address. Nowhere in your paper should there be anything that says www.blablabla.com. It should be the title of the article if there's no author, or the title of the web page if there's no article title and no author. If there's an author, then just the author's last name will do. So here is an example. Slightly more than 73% of happy high school students reported plagiarizing papers sometimes in their high school careers. Smith, 203. So, as the reader, I should be able to see on your works cited page, if you were to have a works cited page, I find whoever Smith is, whatever the title is of the book, I should be able to turn to that page and be able to find that information that's been given there. So you want to make sure that you have these citations in your paper. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind. Because of how your topic is, you may not be citing any sources. You may just be coming up with information all on your own. If that's the case, again, you don't need to cite anything. But if you get any information from anyone, even if it's, let's say, interviewing somebody that you may know personally, you still need to cite their last name. That way we know, okay, you didn't come up with that information, someone else did. If you have any questions about plagiarism or how to correctly cite something, if any of this was confusing and you think you may need to do it for your paper, please do not hesitate to ask.